Hey everybody, welcome back to Tenta Outdoors. My name's Al Tenta. In today's video, we're going to talk about Alone Season 10, Episode 4. I'm going to do a recap of the entire episode. So Episode 4 begins with Cade out foraging and hunting. They show him find some blueberries, slurps down a mouthful of those. Shortly after that, he comes across a large pile of bear scat. He feels it with his fingers and knows that it's fresh, probably the night before. He's not letting the fact that he lost his quiver and his arrows slow him down or lose sight of his end goal, which is getting large game. So Cade found some beer cans and fashioned an arrow that he believes would be sharp enough to take down a bear. Now I want to talk about that a little bit. I've read some comments online with a lot of people questioning whether the bows that we have on there are powerful enough to take down large game, such as a moose or a bear. I assure you, they most definitely are. Most people's bows are between 45 and 55 pounds on the show. And if you take a shot at a big game animal within 20 yards, you will easily have enough penetration and power to hit the vitals of that animal and make a quick, clean kill. Cade comments on if he is able to harvest a bear, that bear will be his ticket to win. I also love the way Cade said, I want to walk away knowing that I did everything I could. Next up on episode 4 is Wyatt, my Canadian brother. His shelter is complete and he goes out to check his gill net. As he's resetting it, he notices otters in the lake. He says, hey man, come on, will you guys catch me a fish? So Wyatt's not seeing a lot of fresh bear or moose sign, and he's really gonna focus on fishing. So Wyatt makes a really impressive fishing setup. His rod is making incredible casts. I was really shocked to see how far he's able to cast that lure out into the water. He made a plug type lure out of probably wet spruce or pine, and he did some really tight wraps of snare wire around it using a gold color, and it looks like a really effective lure. So Wyatt starts the episode out fishing. He's not having any luck. He moves to another spot. He ends up harvesting 2 nice sized lake trouts. They look like 3 pounds, 4 pounds. And it was getting late. He didn't have time to deal with them that night. So to preserve them, because it was still fairly warm at that time, he put them in a live well before he went to bed. And unfortunately, the next morning he wakes up and they were gone. We're not exactly sure what took his fish. Could have been a mink, a marten, owl, any type of bird. Pretty well everything out there loves to eat fish. So unfortunately for Wyatt, he lost his 2 fish. But what I like about Wyatt, he didn't freak out, he didn't get too angry, he didn't blame anybody but himself. Wyatt totally redeems himself and nails another nice lake trout with that fishing setup he created. There's a really cool shot of Wyatt sitting by the beach and a small critter scurrying right around him, showing absolutely no fear of him. That small animal was called a mink, and it could have been the fish thief. I like the interaction between Wyatt and the mink. Said, hey man, you don't mess with me, I won't mess with you. So after Wyatt caught that fish, after losing those other 2 fish in his live well, he really felt confident and he knew that he deserved to be in this competition. So they show Wyatt eating the fish. He's like, man, I feel like a kid at Christmas. I also loved Wyatt's comment about how catching fish brings out the inner kid in him, and I can totally relate because I felt the same way when I was fishing and catching fish out there. So next up in this episode we have Luke. The edit continues to showcase Luke's tremendous skill as an outdoorsman and a survivalist, creating the earthen shelter. He's got more fish than he knows what to do with. He's got a shelter at the beach. And another thing I want to talk about is every time they show a fire at Luke's site, you have to remember that Luke did not bring any way to start fire with him as one of his items. He did not bring a ferro rod. So every time you see a fire, he created that fire using friction. I'm not sure if he used a bow drill or a hand drill. Either way, it's very impressive. So I don't know if they talked about it too much on the episode, but when you dig down in the earth for your shelter, it's a much warmer shelter. So Luke hits a rap while he's fishing. I'm not going to try to imitate it because I definitely won't do it any justice. And he reels in a fish. He alludes to the fact that he's actually losing count of how many fish he's caught. So Luke's got almost more food than he knows what to do with. He's got smoked fish, he's grilling fish. His belly basket is full. Let's not forget, he's also creating those dehydrated berry cakes with those specially designed gaiters that he brought with him. So when Luke talked about his history of education, kind of a mix of homeschool, in-class learning, and learning in the outdoors, it made a lot of sense to me as an educator, and it reinforced the fact that there's a lot of other places to learn besides the confines of a classroom. So Luke shares with the audience that he's been married for 18 years, has a 10-year-old son that's currently enrolled in an outdoor school that's survival influenced. They show Luke in his shelter with a fire blazing in his awesome fire pit, and he's starting to feel sick. He can feel his stomach is off. He's hoping that it's just food poisoning, and he's starting to worry that it could be from eating a couple-day-old fish or perhaps drinking lake water without boiling it. So on day 20, it's midday, his stomach is still upset, he's burping, he's gassy, and he explained what happened in his sleeping bag. I won't go into details, but it's nasty. They then show him by his beach house, still very uncomfortable, trying to rest, trying to make himself feel better. But he is very worried that he has giardia, and he knows that it's only going to get worse, and it could be the beginning of his end for this experience on Alone. So Luke is on the verge of tapping when he hears a noise and observes a bear close to his camp. He changes his decision to call in and tap, and he goes after the bear, knowing that if he gets this bear, this could be his ticket to bring him to the end. So Luke makes a stalk on the bear. He gets 2 shots at 2 different animals. Then he quickly realizes that he's made a mistake. He's realized that it's a female bear with cubs, and he's feeling bad about even taking the shot at the bear. So after that experience with the bears, he believed it to be a beautiful sign. I need to go home to my mama bear and my bear cub. I like the way Luke was so thankful that he missed those 2 bears. Luke decides to make the call to remove himself from the game. So Luke is the 3rd person to tap out. And that experience he had with the bears just brought on overwhelming feelings of parenthood. I love the connection between Luke and his father, and how his time alone in this experience helped him mourn his father. Next up in the episode, we got Taz. So Taz is doing really well procuring food. He's harvesting fish, squirrels, and grouse. Taz talks about how he's got enough food to last him for the next 10 days. And he creates a smokehouse about 300 yards away from his shelter. He talks about how one of the biggest challenges out here when you get food is protecting it from all the other things that want to eat your food. Taz has a trap line of snares set up, and they show him harvesting a squirrel. He also talks about how, as a child, hunting and fishing was a big part of his upbringing. When Taz returns back to his camp, he realizes that something stole a piece of his fish. He's not sure what it is, but he tracks it and determines that it most likely was a marten. What I really like about this scene, whenever Taz encounters a difficulty or some sort of problem, he doesn't get that upset. He stays positive and comes up with a solution to solve the issue. So he needs to figure out a better way to keep his food safe. So he strips bark off several trees, makes a ladder, and builds a cache quite high up in the trees to protect it from all the predators after his food. Taz is confronted with another problem. When he goes out to check his gill net after a night of wind and stormy weather, his gill net is gone. Again, he doesn't freak out, he doesn't panic, he remains very calm, which is super impressive. So Taz gets a large branch and is trying to retrieve his net from the bottom, but he's having difficulty because he made it out of monofilament line and it's very hard to see. Taz talked about how his gill net is a big part of his strategy because it's working for him, trying to catch fish 24/7. So Taz can't find the net at the moment, so he heads back to check his cache and discovers that it's untouched and working perfectly. Taz is looking very strong in this episode. I think an important thing we can all learn from Taz out there during this episode is that mistakes are going to happen. Everyone's going to make mistakes, and you have to have the ability to move on and learn from them and not get down on yourself because of the mistakes you make. The episode then moves on to Jody. She's continuing to finish her cabin. She's got firewood, she's got moss for chinking, and it is a really beautiful structure that she's created. So Jody's only eaten vegetation thus far in her experience, and she's expending 600 to 700 calories per hour working on this cabin. This is a concern to her because she knows she has not eaten protein and she needs to find protein quickly. But she's still focused on completing the cabin. She then goes on to talk about her father's health, and perhaps the timing isn't the best for her to be on the show. She talks about how she draws a lot of strength from her father and she stops and just enjoys the moment. They then show snow on the ground, and Jody is very happy that her roof is done on her cabin and has kept her warm and dry. Her experience so far has proven to her that she is resilient. Jody constructs a door, puts it on the cabin is now complete. So Jody has a dream. She dreams her mother's outside her cabin calling her name for help. She discusses her 5 children and how she wants her children to be proud of her. And she says this cabin is great, but it's also a prison. She realizes then that the family is the most important thing and makes the decision to tap out. She discusses how this experience is just part of her journey, not the end. So next up we have Melanie. So Mel's shelter is looking awesome, and she also decides to build a small woodshed close to her shelter up off the ground to keep her firewood dry. Mel's positivity is infectious. I don't think a smile left her face, and she always maintained a positive attitude throughout the entire feature in this episode. Melanie makes reference to her mom and how her positive attitude is very similar to her mother's, and obviously she learned that from her. Melanie went on to tell a touching story about her mother's passing and how her mother taught her to let go of her fears. Melanie then moves on to fishing. She's fishing with a lure she made out of snare wire and wool from her sweater. All she's eaten so far are berries and inner bark from a tree. So she does end up catching a fish with her new lure. As she's lifting it out of the water, it flips and flops and the lure breaks off. I'm not sure why that happened. It could have been cut by the pike's teeth. The knot could have slipped. I'm not sure. I had something similar like that happen to me out there. A pike had followed my lure in, and when I set the hook, it broke the line off right at his teeth. She makes a new lure out of a Band-Aid wrapper and a piece of her pink underpants. I also liked how Mel used her bra as a hook storage container. A raven flies by and she thanks that raven for watching over her, and she's able to snag a pike and land it, and that was her first protein. I also like how Mel made that spiritual connection with that raven. Kind of made me think of my experience with the owl. She talks about how she's skilled at adapting and surviving and keeping that positive attitude, and she knows the importance of having a strong mental game, because it's often the mental game that takes people out of this competition. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. My name's Al Tenta. Don't forget to tune in next Thursday night for episode 5 of Alone Season 10. I cannot wait to see what unfolds. We'll see you next time.